In day 4, we're going to turn to our first cultural movement. This is the movement of Riot Grrrl. Riot Grrrl was a musical movement and a zine movement that began in the early 90s, to some extent still going on today. It was formed largely by women who had been part of the punk scene, felt that they were excluded from the punk scene, that it was a very much an all-male scene, but at the same time they had important things they wanted to express, and they felt like punk was the appropriate environment and means to express that, and so they adopted it, adapted it for their needs, and created a new musical sound which expressed often what was going on in their lives. An important part of Riot Grrrl is also the zine movement. This is short for magazine. This was DIY, a do-it-yourself, self-made magazines where people took images they cut out, photocopied text that they wrote, so forth, put it all together. It has a very distinctive aesthetic, and these were circulated underground. It was very much a movement that was outside of the mass media, outside of the commercial media. Most of these were barely either free or just cost $1 or something, and so it was able to circulate around people that wouldn't have access maybe to the mainstream media. As a result, it was able to express a lot of things that aren't normally allowed to be said. Riot Grrrl is an important part of third wave feminism because it connects in many ways, and we're going to talk about this more, a feminist theory and feminist ideas with a lived experience of living in the world today, and in some ways embracing and enjoying femininity in a way that previous versions of feminism hadn't really managed to reconcile. In terms of what to do today, we have our first media analysis. That's due Wednesday night, 11:59 p.m. if you had one of those. If you didn't, then please still read through the media analysis. It's a great source. Obviously, the information your classmates bring to the discussion here is every bit as important as the readings that I put up, so please respond to that as part of your virtual presence, and then as always we have reading responses. So the first article we're going to look at is by Gabby Bess. It's called Alternatives to Alternatives, and it's looking at black girls spelled grrr here, that were ignored by Riot Grrrl. And as we'll see in the next movie, that very much enacts this ignoring. But there were definitely women of color, Asian women and black women who were important in the development of Riot Grrrl, and this is going to talk about some of them. And here we come to this question that I mentioned some when talking about the waves, of how to deal with the fact that on the one hand people have been excluded, that this has been presented as very much a white movement, and on the other hand not want to ignore the contributions and visibility of those people. So we want to understand the ways in which Riot Grrrl was white, but also the ways in which it wasn't. A good movie, if you want to look more at the presence of black people in punk music in general, is Afropunk. There's also a long history of queercore. This actually comes out of the 1980s of queer people in punk. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can look into queercore. Pamela Means is one example of a contemporary artist who we're going to look at later, who is a African-American woman performing in the DIY kind of Riot Grrrl style, punk folk. And then some questions to consider. Number one, what is revealing about the whiteness of punk? The fact that this was a predominantly white movement, what does that tell us? And then why might punk be a site of power for people of color? The second reading today is a full-length documentary. It's called The Punk Singer. It focuses on Bikini Kill and Kathleen Hanna, which is kind of the core of the Riot Grrrl movement, and definitely the most famous band, the most famous artist of the movement. Kathleen Hanna goes on to also lead the band Le Tigre, along with Toby, who was a member of both bands. One of the things to note about this movie is it very much practices the exclusion that the earlier article describes, i.e. it doesn't show women of color as part of this movement, while definitely to some extent they were. A content note, this contains some detailed and powerful personal descriptions of abuse suffered by Kathleen Hanna and her friends. Some questions to ask. What motivated the founders of Bikini Kill? Why did they want to create this band? In what ways is their work empowering? Why has it resonated with so many women? And how might these experiences that Kathleen Hanna wants to talk about need to be screamed rather than spoken politely? Think about this idea of having to present our ideas in a calm, polite, feminine way, and how the music of Bikini Kill really undermines that and questions that. The third reading is actually a mess of little readings. The first one is a page from the Riot Girl from the Bikini Kill zine. It's by Kathleen Hanna. It's the Riot Girl Manifesto. Something to think about when reading this is, as I talked about earlier, this interaction between feminist theory and living in patriarchy. In particular, femininity, right? Enjoying being a girl. Girl being something that was often talked about as diminutive in earlier feminism, and here Kathleen is reclaiming it and claiming herself as a girl and claiming her femininity, right? And why is that important to this new version of third wave feminism? The second piece is a song. It's a video from Pamela Means, who I mentioned earlier as a contemporary kind of punk, riot girl, punk folk, whatever genre you call her, inspired artist. The song's called Maybe You Should. Definitely listen to the lyrics. You can find them online. Listen to the message of the song. I think it's a powerful message. She has a lot of important things to say here. Also note that her guitar has a hole in it that she has worn by playing so fiercely. She's an amazing guitarist. Third piece here is Meredith Graves. She is the lead singer of the contemporary punk band Perfect Pussy. They are the most powerful punk band today, and I recommend looking up their music if you like punk music. And this is a piece where she talks about some of her experiences with her body and how that's involved on stage. And again, Meredith is very much someone who presents in a fairly traditional, well, not traditional, but in a feminine way, in a way that we would associate with demureness, with quietness, with being soft-spoken, and at the same time she's this incredibly powerful artist that screams her truth over her music. And so how does she reconcile these things in a single person, and why do we expect them to be separate? And the question to ask here is, why is it that the great contemporary punk music of today is being made by women, whilst punk was started as a very much a male music? Well, actually, that's not entirely true.